The certified letter sat on my kitchen table like a loaded gun. $5,000. That was the fine the homeowners association wanted to collect from me for hunting. Not hunting illegally, not hunting dangerously, just hunting. Period. I stared at the letter, my hands shaking with rage. 20 years I had been hunting these woods. 20 years of following every law, every regulation, every safety protocol. My father taught me to hunt on this very land before these cookie-cutter houses even existed, before the HOA ever drew their first breath of suburban authority. But as I read that letter, something cold settled in my chest. They wanted to play hardball with a man who understood the value of patience and planning. They had no idea what they had just unleashed. That was the moment I realized they had made one critical mistake. They forgot to check who actually owned the land they used for their precious hiking trails. My name is David, and I have been hunting since I was 12 years old. My father brought me to these woods every autumn, teaching me respect for nature, safety with firearms, and the ancient tradition of providing for your family. When he passed away 5 years ago, hunting became more than just a hobby. It became my connection to him, my way of honoring his memory. 3 years ago, I bought a house in Meadowbrook Estates. It seemed perfect. A quiet suburban neighborhood with large lots, mature trees, and best of all, it sat right next to the state forest where I had hunted for decades. I thought I had found the ideal balance between modern comfort and outdoor tradition. The neighborhood was governed by the Meadowbrook Homeowners Association, led by a woman named Patricia Williams. Patricia was the kind of person who measured her grass with a ruler and kept a camera ready to document any violation of the community standards. She had been the HOA president for 8 years, and she ruled the neighborhood like her personal kingdom. At first, everything seemed fine. I followed all the HOA rules. I kept my hunting equipment in the garage, out of sight. I maintained my lawn to their exact specifications. I even painted my front door the approved shade of forest green. I was determined to be a model neighbor. But Patricia had other plans. The first sign of trouble came during my second autumn in the neighborhood. I was loading my truck early one morning, preparing for opening day of deer season. The sun had not even risen yet, but Patricia was already outside, watching me from her driveway with her arms crossed and a disapproving frown. "Good morning, Patricia," I called out, trying to be friendly. She did not respond. She just stood there, watching me load my gear with the intensity of a security guard. That evening, I found the first letter in my mailbox. It was a polite but firm reminder about keeping recreational equipment stored properly and maintaining the family-friendly atmosphere of our community. The letter was signed by Patricia Williams, President, Meadowbrook HOA. I read it twice, confused. My hunting equipment was stored properly. Everything was in my garage, organized and secured. I had not violated any rules that I could see. But the letters kept coming. The next week, I received a complaint about my early morning departures. Apparently, starting my truck at 5 in the morning was disruptive to the peaceful enjoyment of the neighborhood. The week after that, I got a letter about the inappropriate bumper stickers on my vehicle. My truck had exactly 2 stickers, one supporting wildlife conservation and another for the state fish and game department. I tried to talk to Patricia directly. I knocked on her door one evening, hoping to clear the air and find a reasonable compromise. "Patricia, I received your letters about my hunting activities. I want to make sure I understand your concerns." She looked at me like I had just tracked mud across her white carpet. "Mr. Chen, this is a family neighborhood. We have children here. We have people who moved here for peace and quiet, not to be reminded of violence every morning. But hunting is not violence. It is conservation. It is heritage. I follow all the laws, all the safety protocols. That may be true, but it does not fit with the values of this community. Perhaps you should consider finding a hobby that is more appropriate for suburban living. The conversation ended there. I walked back to my house knowing that reason and compromise were not going to work with Patricia Williams. What I did not know yet was that Patricia had been watching me for months, documenting my every move and building a case against me. She had photographed my truck, recorded my departure times, and even interviewed other neighbors about their concerns regarding my activities. The battle lines were drawn, and I was about to find out just how far the Meadowbrook HOA was willing to go to force their vision of suburban perfection on everyone who lived there. The harassment escalated quickly after that conversation. Patricia Williams had apparently decided that I was a threat to her vision of suburban paradise, and she was going to use every tool in her HOA arsenal to eliminate that threat. The first major incident happened on a Saturday morning in November. I was cleaning my hunting rifle in my garage, something I had done safely for decades. The garage door was open for ventilation, and I had my cleaning supplies spread out on my workbench. I was being methodical and careful, just as my father had taught me. I looked up to see Patricia standing at the end of my driveway with her phone out, recording me. She was not trying to be subtle about it. She stood there for several minutes, filming me as I worked. "Can I help you with something, Patricia?" I asked, setting down my cleaning rod. "Just documenting activities that might be of concern to the community," she replied, not lowering her phone. "I am cleaning my rifle in my own garage on my own property. There is nothing illegal or dangerous about what I am doing." "We will see about that," she said, finally walking away. 3 days later, I received a formal complaint letter. This time, it was not just from Patricia. It was signed by 5 different neighbors, all claiming that they were concerned about weapons being maintained in residential areas and worried about the safety of their children. I knew these neighbors. I had talked to most of them before. They had never expressed any concerns about my hunting activities, but now, suddenly, they were all deeply worried about my rifle cleaning. The next week brought another complaint. This time, it was about my camouflage clothing. Apparently, wearing camouflage while doing yard work was inappropriate attire for a residential neighborhood and created an intimidating atmosphere. I was starting to understand the game Patricia was playing. She was systematically documenting everything I did, finding ways to twist normal activities into violations of community standards. She was building a paper trail, preparing for something bigger. The something bigger came in December. I had just returned from a successful hunting trip. I was unloading my truck in my driveway when Patricia appeared with 2 other HOA board members. They stood there watching me like I was some kind of criminal. "Mr. Chen, we need to talk," Patricia said, her voice sharp with authority. "About what?" "About your ongoing activities that are incompatible with our community standards. We have received numerous complaints from neighbors who are concerned about your behavior." I set down the cooler I was carrying and faced them directly. "What behavior? I have followed every rule in the HOA handbook. I have broken no laws. I have done nothing wrong." "That is not how the community sees it," said another board member, a man named Roger Thompson. "Your hunting activities are creating a hostile environment for families with children." "How is legal hunting creating a hostile environment?" "The weapons, the camouflage, the early morning departures, the dead animals," Patricia said, her voice getting louder. "This is not what people expect when they move to a nice neighborhood like Meadowbrook." I felt my patience wearing thin. I have lived here for 3 years. I have been hunting for 20 years. I have never had an accident, never violated a law, never threatened anyone. What exactly do you want from me? "We want you to stop," Patricia said simply. "Find a different hobby, something more appropriate for suburban living." The conversation went downhill from there. They presented me with a list of suggestions for alternative activities I could pursue: golf, tennis, cycling, anything that did not involve firearms or dead animals. I tried to explain the importance of hunting to me personally. I tried to educate them about wildlife conservation and the role that hunters play in maintaining healthy ecosystems. I even offered to give a presentation to the HOA about hunting safety and ethics. They were not interested in education. They were not interested in compromise. They wanted complete capitulation. "Mr. Chen," Patricia said as they prepared to leave, "we have been more than patient with you. But our patience has limits. If you cannot voluntarily comply with community standards, we will have to take more formal action." "What kind of formal action?" "The kind that involves fines and penalties. The kind that could affect your ability to live in this neighborhood." After they left, I sat in my driveway for a long time, trying to process what had just happened. I had never dealt with anything like this before. I had always believed that if you followed the rules and minded your own business, you could live peacefully anywhere. But Patricia Williams and the Meadowbrook HOA had different ideas about what peaceful living looked like, and they were preparing to use every weapon in their bureaucratic arsenal to enforce their vision. I just did not know yet how far they were willing to go. The formal fine arrived on a Tuesday morning in February. I remember the date exactly, February 15th. The envelope was thick, official-looking, and marked "Certified Mail Signature Required." I signed for it with a bad feeling in my stomach. Patricia had promised formal action, and I knew this was it. I opened the envelope slowly, trying to prepare myself for whatever bureaucratic punishment they had cooked up. Nothing could have prepared me for what I found inside. $5,000. That was the fine they were imposing on me for repeated violations of community standards regarding inappropriate recreational activities. $5,000 for hunting legally on public land. The letter was 3 pages long, filled with legal language and references to specific sections of the HOA handbook. They cited me for possession and maintenance of weapons in residential areas, inappropriate attire that creates community discord, disruptive early morning activities, and engaging in activities incompatible with family-friendly community values. Every single charge was about hunting. Every single citation was about the very activity that had connected me to my father and kept his memory alive. But the worst part was not the fine itself. It was the threat that came with it. If I did not pay the fine within 30 days and cease all hunting activities immediately, they would begin the process of placing a lien on my property. They could actually force me to sell my house. I read the letter 3 times, my hands shaking with rage and disbelief. Then I looked up their citations in the HOA handbook, trying to understand how they were justifying this attack. The citations were all based on vague language about community standards and appropriate activities. The same handbook that allowed homeowners to keep boats, motorcycles, and recreational vehicles in their driveways. The same handbook that permitted backyard barbecues, loud lawn equipment, and weekend parties. But hunting was different. Hunting was incompatible with family values. I spent the next week researching their claims and documenting how selectively they were enforcing the rules. My neighbor 2 houses down had a motorcycle that he revved up every Saturday morning at dawn. No citations. The family across the street had weekend parties that went until midnight. No fines. Another neighbor had a boat trailer that had been parked in his driveway for 6 months. No violations. But my hunting equipment, stored properly in my garage, was a $5,000 offense. I decided to attend the next HOA meeting to present my case. I prepared a presentation showing how I had followed all the rules, how hunting was a legal activity protected by state law, and how their enforcement was selective and unfair. The meeting was held in the community center on a Thursday evening. About 30 neighbors attended, along with the 5-member HOA board. Patricia sat at the head of the table like a judge preparing to deliver a sentence. When my turn came to speak, I stood up and began my presentation. I talked about my father, about the tradition of hunting, about conservation and wildlife management. I showed them my hunting licenses, my safety certifications, my clean record with the State Fish and Game Department. The room was silent as I spoke. Some neighbors nodded along, seeming to understand my position. Others looked uncomfortable, like they were hearing information that challenged their preconceptions. When I finished, Patricia stood up and addressed the room. "Mr. Chen, we appreciate your passion for your hobby, but the fact remains that your activities are not compatible with the values of this community. The board has received numerous complaints from neighbors who feel unsafe and uncomfortable with your behavior." "What behavior?" I asked. "I have never threatened anyone. I have never violated any laws. I have followed every rule in the HOA handbook." "The rules are not just about what is written down," Patricia replied. "They are about maintaining the character and values of our neighborhood, and the board has determined that hunting activities do not align with those values." That was when I realized the truth. This was not about rules or violations or community standards. This was about power. Patricia Williams had decided that she did not like hunters, and she was going to use her position to eliminate hunting from her neighborhood. The vote was 5-0 in favor of upholding the fine. I walked out of that meeting knowing that fighting within their system was useless. They had rigged the game from the beginning, and they were never going to play fair. But they had made one critical mistake. They had declared war on someone who understood the importance of patience, planning, and knowing your enemy. That night, I began planning my revenge. The morning after the HOA meeting, I woke up with a clarity I had not felt in months. The anger was still there, burning in my chest, but it was focused now. Patricia Williams and her board wanted to play hardball, and I was going to show them what hardball really looked like. I started by studying the enemy. I spent hours reading the HOA handbook, the community bylaws, and the original deed restrictions for Meadowbrook Estates. I researched Patricia Williams herself, learning about her background, her motivations, and her methods of operation. What I discovered was both enlightening and infuriating. Patricia had been using her position as HOA president to enforce her personal preferences on the entire neighborhood. She had fined people for having the wrong color mailbox, cited homeowners for planting flowers she did not approve of, and even forced one family to remove a basketball hoop because it was incompatible with the aesthetic vision of the community. But my research also revealed something interesting. The HOA had been trying to expand their influence beyond the boundaries of Meadowbrook Estates. They had been working to gain control over the recreational activities and land use in the surrounding area. That was when I discovered the hiking trails. The Meadowbrook HOA had been promoting a series of hiking trails that wound through the forest adjacent to our neighborhood. They advertised these trails on their website, included them in their marketing materials to potential homebuyers, and even organized community hiking events. The trails were beautiful, well-maintained, and popular with residents. They featured scenic overlooks, wildlife viewing areas, and interpretive signs about local ecology. The HOA was clearly proud of these trails and considered them a major selling point for the neighborhood. There was just one problem. The trails were not on HOA property. They were not even on public land. They were on private property, owned by an elderly man named Walter Morrison. I drove out to meet Mr. Morrison on a Saturday morning in March. He lived in a modest farmhouse about 2 miles from Meadowbrook Estates, on a 100-acre property that had been in his family for 3 generations. Walter was 83 years old, with calloused hands and sharp eyes that missed nothing. He had been letting the HOA use his land for their hiking trails out of neighborly goodness, without any formal lease or agreement. They asked me about 5 years ago if they could put some trails through my back 40, Walter told me as we sat on his front porch. Said it would be good for the community, good for the kids to have a place to explore nature. I figured, why not? I was not using that land for anything anyway. Do you have any kind of written agreement with them? Nope, just a handshake and a promise to keep the trails clean. They have been good about that, I will give them credit. They maintained the trails, put up signs, even built a little bridge over the creek. I chose my words carefully. Mr. Morrison, would you be interested in a different arrangement for your land? He looked at me curiously. What kind of arrangement? I would like to buy it, all of it. I can pay cash and I can close quickly. Walter leaned back in his chair, studying me. You are that hunter fellow they have been complaining about, are not you? I nodded. Yes, sir, I am. Well, I will be damned. He chuckled and shook his head. They came by here last month, asking if I would sell them the land. Wanted to buy it for their community use, make it a permanent nature preserve. My heart started racing. What did you tell them? Told them I would think about it, but I will be honest with you, son. I have been thinking about selling anyway. My kids live in California, and I am getting too old to maintain this place. I need the money for a retirement home. We talked for another hour about the land, the price, and the timeline. Walter was motivated to sell, and I was motivated to buy. We agreed on a price that was fair to both of us, and more importantly, we agreed on a timeline that would allow me to close before the HOA could make their own offer. As I drove home that afternoon, I felt a satisfaction I had not experienced in months. Patricia Williams thought she had all the power in this situation. She thought she could use her position to force me into submission. But she had forgotten one of the most important rules of warfare: know your terrain. The HOA had built their entire recreational program around land they did not own. They had marketed their neighborhood based on amenities they did not control. They had made themselves completely dependent on the goodwill of an elderly farmer who was ready to sell to the highest bidder. And I was about to become that highest bidder. The game was about to change in ways that Patricia Williams could never have imagined. The next 2 weeks moved at lightning speed. I had to secure financing, hire a lawyer, and coordinate the entire purchase without alerting the HOA to what I was doing. It was like planning a military operation, and I loved every minute of it. My first call was to my bank. I had been saving money for years, planning to buy a hunting cabin somewhere in the mountains. Those savings, combined with a loan against my current house, gave me exactly what I needed to make Walter Morrison an offer he could not refuse. My second call was to a real estate attorney named Jennifer Hayes. I explained the situation to her, and she understood immediately what I was trying to accomplish. "You want to buy this land before the HOA can make their own offer," she said, "and you want to do it in a way that gives you maximum leverage over their hiking trails." "Exactly. How quickly can we close?" "If the seller is motivated and you have cash, we can close in 10 days, maybe less." The next step was getting a survey of the property and confirming exactly what I would be buying. The survey revealed that Walter Morrison's land was even more valuable than I had initially thought. Not only did it contain all of the HOA's hiking trails, but it also included the parking area they had been using for trailhead access. The HOA had essentially built their entire recreational program on someone else's property, without any legal rights or protections. They had never bothered to secure a lease, never established any formal agreement, and never protected themselves against exactly what I was about to do. It was a rookie mistake, and it was going to cost them everything. While my lawyer was preparing the paperwork, I began researching the legal requirements for establishing hunting groups on private property. I contacted the State Fish and Game Department, spoke with local hunting organizations, and even consulted with a wildlife biologist about sustainable hunting practices. What I discovered was that I could not only hunt on my own property, but I could also establish it as a hunting club and invite other hunters to join me. With proper management, the land could support multiple hunting groups throughout the year. The irony was perfect. The HOA had tried to eliminate hunting from their neighborhood, and instead they were about to get a 100-acre hunting preserve right next to their back doors. The closing was scheduled for a Friday morning in April. I arrived at the lawyer's office early, with a certified check and a sense of anticipation I had not felt since Christmas morning as a child. Walter Morrison was already there, dressed in his best suit and looking a little sad to be selling his family's land. But he was also practical enough to know that he needed the money and could not maintain the property anymore. "You sure about this, son?" he asked me as we reviewed the final documents. "Once you sign these papers, you are going to own a lot of land and a lot of responsibility." "I am sure, Mr. Morrison. I promise you that I will take good care of this land." The signing took less than an hour. By noon on that Friday, I was the legal owner of 100 acres of prime hunting land, complete with hiking trails, a parking area, and a very surprised HOA. My lawyer handed me the keys to the property and a folder full of legal documents. "Congratulations, Mr. Chen. You now own the land that the Meadowbrook HOA has been using for their recreational activities. When do I need to notify them?" "Legally, you can terminate their informal use of the property immediately, but I would recommend giving them written notice with a reasonable timeline. It will look better if this ends up in court." I drove straight from the lawyer's office to the property. I parked at the trailhead where dozens of HOA residents had parked over the years, and I walked the trails that they had considered their private nature preserve. The trails were beautiful, well-maintained, and perfect for hunting. The forest was thick with oak and maple trees, providing excellent cover for deer. The creek that ran through the property would attract wildlife from miles around. There were natural clearings that would be perfect for setting up hunting blinds. It was everything I had dreamed of in a hunting property, and it was right next to the neighborhood where Patricia Williams had tried to find me for pursuing my passion. As I walked the trails, I began planning the transformation. I would establish hunting groups for bow hunters, rifle hunters, and muzzleloader enthusiasts. I would create a schedule that maximized the use of the property while ensuring sustainable hunting practices. I would install proper safety equipment, establish clear boundaries, and create a hunting club that would be a model for responsible land use. The HOA had wanted to eliminate hunting from their community. Instead, they were about to get more hunting activity than they had ever imagined. I spent the rest of the afternoon walking the property, making notes, and savoring the moment. In just a few days, I would deliver the news that would change everything. Patricia Williams was about to learn that actions have consequences, and that sometimes those consequences come from directions you never expected. I crafted the letter carefully with help from my attorney. It needed to be professional, legal, and absolutely devastating. The letter was addressed to Patricia Williams, president of the Meadowbrook HOA, and it was delivered by certified mail on a Monday morning. The letter was simple and direct. Dear Ms. Williams and members of the Meadowbrook HOA Board, I am writing to inform you that I have recently purchased the property located at 1247 Old Mill Road, which includes approximately 100 acres of forested land. This property contains the hiking trails that your organization has been using for community recreational activities. Effective immediately, I am terminating all informal agreements that may have existed between the previous property owner and your organization regarding the use of this land. As of the date of this letter, the Meadowbrook HOA no longer has permission to use this property for hiking trails, community events, or any other recreational activities. I am establishing this property as a private hunting preserve and will be forming hunting groups to utilize the land for its intended purpose. All existing signage, trail markers, and improvements installed by the HOA must be removed within 30 days. If you have any questions about this matter, please contact my attorney, Jennifer Hayes, at the number listed below. Sincerely, David Chen. I sent copies of the letter to all 5 board members, and I had my attorney deliver a copy directly to Patricia Williams at her home. I wanted to make sure there was no confusion about what was happening. The reaction was swift and spectacular. My phone started ringing within 2 hours of the letter being delivered. The first call was from Roger Thompson, the HOA treasurer. David, surely we can work something out here. The trails are important to our community. People bought homes here specifically because of those trails. Roger, I offered to work something out months ago. I offered to educate the community about hunting, to find compromises, to be a good neighbor. Your response was to fine me $5,000 for pursuing illegal activity. But you cannot just shut down the trails. People depend on them for exercise, for recreation, for their mental health. People depend on hunting for the same reasons, but that did not stop you from trying to eliminate it from my life. The second call was from Patricia Williams herself. Her voice was shaking with anger and disbelief. David, what you are doing is vindictive and petty. You are punishing the entire community because of a disagreement between us. Patricia, I am exercising my legal rights as a property owner, just like you exercised your legal rights as HOA president when you decided to fine me for hunting. We can fight this. We can take you to court. We can make your life miserable. Feel free to try, but you might want to check with your lawyer first. I own the property. I have the deed. I have the right to use my land however I see fit as long as it is legal, and hunting is legal. The third call was from a neighbor I barely knew, begging me to reconsider. David, my wife walks those trails every morning. It is the only exercise she gets. Please, There has to be another way. That call was the hardest one to take. I did not want to punish innocent neighbors for Patricia Williams' actions, but I also was not going to back down from the principle at stake. Over the next week, I received dozens of calls, emails, and even a few visitors at my door. Some people were angry, some were desperate, and a few were actually supportive of what I was doing. The local newspaper picked up the story, and suddenly I was getting calls from reporters wanting to interview me about the HOA hiking trail controversy. I agreed to one interview, and I made sure to explain exactly why I had taken this action. "This is not about hiking trails," I told the reporter. "This is about a HOA that decided to use their power to eliminate activities they personally disapproved of, regardless of whether those activities were legal or harmless. They created this situation when they chose to fine me for hunting instead of working with me to find a solution." The story ran on the front page of the local section with the headline, "Hunter Buys Land After HOA Dispute." The article was fair and balanced, explaining both sides of the controversy and the legal issues involved. But the most satisfying moment came when I received a call from Walter Morrison. "David, I heard about the fuss you have stirred up over there. I just wanted to tell you that I am proud of you for standing up for yourself. Those HOA folks thought they could push anyone around, and it is about time someone showed them different." The revelation phase was complete. The HOA now understood that their actions had consequences, and that I was not going to be pushed around anymore. Now came the really fun part, establishing the hunting groups. The transformation of the property began immediately. Within 2 weeks of taking ownership, I had established the Morrison Wildlife Preserve, named in honor of the previous owner who had been such a gentleman throughout the entire process. I partnered with 3 local hunting organizations to establish rotating hunting groups throughout the year. The spring turkey season would be managed by the local chapter of the National Wild Turkey Federation. The archery deer season would be run by the Traditional Bow Hunters Association, and the rifle deer season would be managed by a group of experienced hunters who specialized in wildlife management and conservation. Each group was required to follow strict safety protocols, maintain detailed harvest records, and contribute to habitat improvement projects on the property. We installed professional-grade hunting blinds, created food plots for wildlife, and even built a small cabin that could serve as a base of operations for the hunting groups. The local fish and game department was thrilled with the project. They had been looking for opportunities to increase hunting access in the area, and the Morrison Wildlife Preserve provided exactly what they needed. The department even offered to help with habitat management and population surveys. The safety measures we implemented were extensive. Every hunter was required to pass a safety test, provide proof of insurance, and follow a strict code of conduct. We established clear boundaries, required all hunters to check in and out at the cabin, and created a communication system that ensured everyone on the property knew where other hunters were located. The irony was not lost on anyone. The HOA had claimed that hunting was dangerous and inappropriate for a residential area, but the Morrison Wildlife Preserve had more safety protocols and professional management than most commercial hunting operations. The community reaction was mixed but evolving. Some neighbors remained angry about losing their hiking trails, but others began to understand the principles at stake and even expressed support for what I had done. The most surprising development came from an unexpected source. 3 neighbors approached me about joining the hunting groups. They had never hunted before, but they were interested in learning about wildlife management and conservation. "David, "We never understood hunting before," said one neighbor, a man named Tom Bradley. "But after seeing how professionally you have managed this property, we realize we were probably wrong about a lot of things." I began offering educational programs about hunting and wildlife management, open to anyone in the community who was interested. The programs covered topics like wildlife biology, conservation funding, and the role of hunting in ecosystem management. The HOA, meanwhile, was struggling to adapt to the new reality. They had built their entire recreational program around the hiking trails, and losing them created a significant problem for community morale and property values. Patricia Williams resigned as HOA president 6 months after I bought the property. The stress of the situation, combined with criticism from other board members about her handling of the original dispute, had become too much for her to bear. The new HOA board approached me about finding a compromise. They offered to rescind the fine and issue a public apology in exchange for limited access to the trails during non-hunting periods. I agreed to the compromise, but on my terms. The HOA would have access to designated trails during specific hours and seasons, but only after acknowledging my right to hunt and agreeing to educate their members about wildlife conservation. The agreement was signed at a community meeting attended by over 100 neighbors. The new HOA president, a reasonable woman named Sarah Mitchell, issued a public apology for the treatment I had received. "We made mistakes in how we handled this situation," Sarah said to the assembled crowd. "We let personal biases override our responsibility to treat all homeowners fairly. We are committed to doing better in the future." The Morrison Wildlife Preserve became a model for how hunters and non-hunters could coexist peacefully. The property hosted school groups, scout troops, and nature photographers alongside the hunting groups. It became a demonstration of how private land ownership and responsible stewardship could benefit an entire community. Looking back on the entire experience, I learned valuable lessons about standing up for your principles, the importance of knowing your rights, and the power of strategic thinking over emotional reactions. Most importantly, I learned that sometimes the best way to defend your values is not to fight within someone else's system, but to create your own system based on those values. Patricia Williams had tried to eliminate hunting from her neighborhood. Instead, she had created the most successful hunting preserve in the county.